All right, ladies and gentlemen, how you doing? Welcome to Color Commentary, Colorful Conversations about Christianity, culture, and race. I am your host, Markus Lloyd, and with me, as always, is Antwuan Malone. What's going on, Antwuan?
What's up? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good all the things.
Okay, you sound like, are you on the Truman Show all of a sudden? You're just taking it way back. Jim Carrey in the Truman Show, he used to say that stuff.
Like, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning.
Right.
Or
what? Now you're doing the Robert.
Welcome. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to America 2025.
2025, we in it, right?
Edition.
Yeah, and we kind of go in and out of our versions of color commentary. We had our season that we did recently, the Christianity in the Public Square, which I think is going to be something that is going to be able to be kind of invested in or listened to regularly as we go through these next 4 years. We had kind of our response to the series, and I think as we prep, because we're prepping kind of what our next series is going to be. We're going to have these times where you and I can break out into the studio a little bit and just kind of comment on some things that we're seeing in the world, seeing in our country, seeing in the church, culture, Christianity, and race, all that good stuff. And I think we're gonna need it, Antwuan. We're gonna need to drop in quick. We don't got time to get all the couches in place and get down to the studio and get it all. This is gonna be just kind of some rough.
Well, 2025 it already started pretty fast and furious. Like the first week of 2025 was crazy. If you remember, it was just like the moment we said Happy New Year, we had things happening that week. We had, if you remember back, and then we've got the inauguration, and this week has already been, created a lot of emotions. There's a lot of fast moving parts and pieces to things. And there's just, it feels like we have to just stay in the ready position if we want to be on top of what is coming culturally.
That's right. And for, I think for all of us in this justice work and right, what is it? We stay ready, you know what I mean? So you don't have to get ready, or at least that's what I'm hoping.
You hope to be that, right?
Yeah. That's part of what I think I want to talk about today a little bit, is this idea of our readiness, right? Like here we are, like you said, we're in 2025. We've been through this really difficult election that we always have every 4 years, and definitely the last couple of election cycles have been even more difficult to go through. This particular one, where we're looking at potentially the first woman, mixed race person coming into the office, somebody who's other than white coming in, and then a resurgence, if you will, of a bygone era of number 45 coming in as well. And we find ourselves at the election where America chose 45 and make him 47. You know what I'm saying? They chose Donald Trump again, and a little bit more appearing to be more overwhelmingly so. Although I know that there's conspiracy theories about whether the election was stolen. You know what I mean?
Oh my goodness.
I want to say it. I want to say, why can't I say it? You know what I'm saying? We went through it before. Why can't I? Look, the election was stolen, y'all. Just tell everybody. Hey, look, it doesn't matter. Facebook ain't got no fact checkers anymore.
No,
you know what I mean? I can say what I want anymore.
Anyone can say whatever they want. Now, I will say this. I'm not sure I'm ready. I know you're joking around.
I am joking in case I know he's listening. So.
Oh my gosh. But it is surprising. I am going to say that I'm surprised at the way the numbers looked, the overwhelmingness of the numbers. And I know I don't know if we talked about that a little bit.
We did not.
But it is overwhelming. No, it's surprising that it's overwhelming numbers, which, however, speaks into what it's going to be like now. If all of those people, I think someone said, and this is not, I don't have the stats, and so this was what someone said. I probably shouldn't even say it, but maybe.
So whatever Antwuan's about to say does not represent color commentary nor threaded. It's his own.
Maybe even himself, right?
Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
No, 80%. Someone said that 80% of evangelicals voted for Donald Trump, and that 80% is a huge number. And it made me wonder, who's evangelical?
Did it give caveats to the cultural background or racial background, or did it just say period, 80% of evangelicals? Oh, you don't know. You just made it up, so we don't even know if your stat is right.
That's what I'm saying. I heard it from someone, and it the sniff test was like 80% is huge if it's like all evangelicals, right? Including, like you're saying, people of all ethnic backgrounds.
Right. Because that was true. And when he came through the last time, he got 80+% of white evangelical votes as well. So I think it was like it was either 83 or 80 or 88, right? It's you fill out the 8 or fill out the 3 and you get the 8, and maybe my dyslexia working it out. But that was a evangelical white vote last time. So I would imagine the numbers are the same, if not greater. But we also have, because again, they I don't think that people did not vote as much as they did in 2020. So the numbers generally are down. But what we saw is we did see movement from people of color over to that space, right? So you could say the 80% still, like you said, still seems like a lot. Might be worth looking up. Anybody's fact checking. We're not gonna spend too much time on this because we don't know.
I'm looking at something right now on the internet. No, the Baptist News Global has some numbers out there that says, I think it is white. Yeah, so it was 82% white, born again, or evangelical Christian was the number of for 2024. 2020, that number was less. It was 63%. Or something like that. So anyway, we have to look at it a little bit more. You guys can look it all up. But the point is, an overwhelming majority of people voted for Trump, who call themselves Christians, white people, and they're still socially they have a lot of social dominance and social power, and so that is going to shape a lot of what the future is. In this country, and they're aligning with something about Donald Trump, and they're aligning with something about Donald Trump.
Yeah,
and it feels like, real quick, it feels like they're aligning with Donald Trump. It feels to me sometimes more than just conservatism, and that's the point I wish I could tease out a little bit more, because I'm not afraid to say I don't think that even if I was a conservative, and or rather, even if I was a Republican, like Donald Trump wouldn't be the type of Republican I would vote for. But that's the guy that continues to come out of that camp.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to think through, particularly. And maybe we should just hit it, right? Like, so we're in the first week since the inauguration of this president. We're just a couple of days after that, right? And it's already been raucous. I know some of you who are, tenacious listeners, you might have watched the inauguration live with us, where we had several guests come on and talk about different issues of race and engagement with one another, crossing boundaries, building bridges, but also different things around immigration. But I think, to your point, Antwuan, the thing that that we watched on that inauguration was as a Christian and as somebody who has spent most of my time in conservative spaces, had spent a lot of my years in the Republican space, when I was identifying to some extent. I was really floored by the speech that Donald Trump gave that day. I know you have probably the list of things that, as we were kind of going through, you were kind of making a list of some of the stuff that was being said and some of the phrases and kind of things. And I know for us, like, there were lots of phrases that were uttered throughout that really made it difficult to listen to. A lot of racial dog whistles that were popping out. But there are a couple of things that, and maybe we can chat about that, and then we can kind of move through the week a bit for us. Was there any particular sort of theme via the president's speech to the nation, whether it be the night before it's the inauguration speech, or even his speech on the quote unquote lawn to the peoples, that kind of grabbed you and gave you pause, or created some sort of emotion inside of you?
Well, I just get the sense that, Donald Trump is often, if you will, playing the game, playing the political game, and so probably it may seem light to say that when he stands up he gives the inauguration speech and he says a series of things there, and there were some things, like you said, in that speech that's written for him. He's pretty stuck to the teleprompter. That made me say, "Huh, that's an interesting thing to choose lightly, to say it lightly. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting language." But then he goes to the time right afterwards, and he says, "Ah, I wish I would have said this," basically, or this is what I would really want to say, and that made me feel, it's just the idea that he's not going to say what he's really saying. He's playing in front of the camera. He's going to play the teleprompter game, but then in front of his crowd, he's going to say, "This isn't really what I really wanted to say." It just speaks to this, like, can I trust? At what point can I trust what I hear from him? And it's just not the mark of a good leader. Like, it would be the version of me standing in front of a congregation and saying one thing, but then in front of my team or in a circle, I was like, "Man, I just wish I would have said this," and those two things are in conflict with each other, or they're different. It makes me feel less trustworthy, and it's just not the sort of thing that I think we would want. So what that says is that what it can communicate is that he's just disingenuous, and that I can't trust him, and that even when he's saying something that I think I want to rock with, I'm wondering, like, is this the real him, or is he playing games? And so I just that was the taste. Like, he said what he said. I had some challenges what he said in the main speech, and then afterward he says, "Well, I wish I would have said these things," and spent a whole nother speech saying basically what he wanted to really say. And you have that dynamic, two different Trumps.
So you're thinking about in terms of just the idea that when you hear him in public, which we're going to hear a lot of, right? I think that's what's already become almost painstakingly aware. It's kind of the thing I forgot from the first movie, is how often I was going to have to kind of follow this cat around and see not only what he's doing, but what he's saying. And that's already started in this first week. You're saying as we kind of hear that, as we go into the sequel, that we still don't know much about who he really is based on what he says in public. Is that kind of what you're lamenting a bit?
We do, but whenever he seems like he may be moving away from the parts that we don't like about what he's saying.
Yep.
I don't know whether we can trust that, or is he just playing the game? Now, we can also, most of us can tell the difference between teleprompter Trump and Twitter Trump and regular, so I get that too, but it just feels like a game. And I know that seems naive to say. Someone's like, "Antwuan, poor boy, of course it's a game." I'm like, well, but it's even
my poor man.
Poor boy. But it's even more, it feels like even more of a game. Like, he just, I'm just gonna go up here and play this part, read these lines. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, I'm gonna do the thing that I really want to do, which makes me want to know, what are you really doing? What's really being put into place if I can't trust what you're saying? And that's not going to win unity from those who are far from him, I don't believe.
I don't know. Look, I don't know if anybody's actually trying for unity, like, in the political game. You know what I mean? I don't think anybody's actually. I don't feel like there's any reward for our leaders for unity. I think there's a reward for competition, and there's a reward for winning and the opposite for losing. And I think that's a big piece. When you hear, and I'm listening, thinking at not only the inauguration speech, but definitely speeches, a lot of speeches coming forward too. It's about winning. And look, we won, we will win, constant. And so I think that's not what we're doing from a unity standpoint. For me, as I'm listening to it, I think one of the themes that kind of hit me is just this continual expansion mindset. um, which is a valiant thing, right? It's one of the aspects that I think is great about human existence. I think about the cultural mandate in Genesis 1:28, where he says, fill the earth and subdue it, and it's to cultivate the earth, fill it. You got to go to the ends of the earth. So there's this idea, even in our creation and how we were created, that we're supposed to be ultimately thinking about this movement expansion. But I think what I hear in his move is kind of this idea of territory, like taking of not taking like I'm going to go and grab this territory, but the acquisition of the expansion of territory.
Yeah.
I don't think we've actually seen an executive order signing where the Gulf of Mexico becomes the Gulf of America, but that's just that's kind of rhetoric that's thrown out, right? Like this is the expanding of American territory in such a way that we want to name these things around us after us, right?
The virtual planting of a flag,
the virtual planting of the flag, and the actual wanting to plant the flag in Mars, right? Like it's again this expansion of territory. All the rhetoric that came before about the connection of merging United States and Canada, about taking Greenland, about seizing control of the Panama Canal, right? Again, like that kind of expansion language, and even the again, if you're writing the speech, you're using very specific language, and the fact that you utilize the term manifest destiny in terms of your expansion model and thought process, particularly about space, doesn't, just because it was about space, doesn't give you it doesn't give you the right to ultimately use that kind of triggering language, particularly when we start to think about the ways in which race and culture and ethnicity have played such a key part in Donald Trump's narrative since he hit the scene. Excuse me. And so when you start making, the terms like manifest destiny, was ultimately this, harkens us back to the expansion of America from east to west. And of course we celebrate that in our history books that are created in Texas, right? They talk about this as man overcoming the Western Front and the Colorados and the Rockies. Like, look what we overcame. Never really reminding people that there were folks there already, right? But this idea of manifest destiny is that we move from east to west because God has destined us to do this. It's that same mentality that fuels the doctrine of discovery, that fuels colonialism, that fueled ultimately the ways in which people were treated in South America when people colonized them, that made it such a mixed area, but also moved us towards slavery, worked against our Native American friends and genocide, this expansion aspect. So that theme, that constant movement, expansion theme, is something, and particularly utilizing this terminology that manifests destiny, really kind of harkens me back to an America of the past, that ultimately had no problem in the midst of their expansion mentality and motif at openly revealing and calling themselves and naming themselves as white supremacists, right? And so, and this is what, again, we've seen in even this, in the language of "Make America Great Again." This is continually talking about moving us backwards, right? And for many, moving us backwards is a way we move forward, moving back to when white was supreme and white was in control. Which, let me just tell you, white has still been in control. They've never been supreme, but they've been in control. It hasn't gone away. So anybody who's like, "Oh, the white man is under attack," like that's not true. Like there's you guys still run everything. But this harkening back to this history is really problematic to me moving forward, particularly with things that are right at the top of his executive order list, but around immigration, things of that nature. I mean, I don't want to keep monologuing, right?
No, the language I was looking up, like looking at his speech, because when I was writing the notes when we were going through this on Monday, I couldn't type fast enough to like get the words. And so I found the transcript, and the part that you're talking about, just about the expansion, it says that this is the quote from the speech. It's the lifeblood of a great nation. Right now, our nation is more ambitious than any other, and I would circle personally ambitious. There's no other nation like our nation. Americans are explorers, builders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and pioneers. The spirit of the frontier is written into our hearts. And so when you start saying frontier, that sounds like exploration or expansion, right? That starts to hint at this thing that we're talking about. It says the call of the next great adventure resounds from within our souls. Our American ancestors turned a small group of colonies on the edge of a vast continent into a mighty republic of the most extraordinary citizens on earth. No one comes close. Americans pushed thousands of miles through a rugged land of untamed wilderness. They crossed deserts, scaled mountains, braved untold dangers, won the Wild West, ended slavery, rescued millions from tyranny, lifted millions from poverty, harnessed electricity, split the atom, launched mankind into the heavens, and put the universe of human knowledge into the palm of a human hand. If we work together, there is nothing we cannot do, and no dream we cannot achieve. And that sounds, that sounds very inspiring to some, and to the rest of us, it sounds like, man, did you leave a lot out of that?
Yeah, because if you think about the last half of that, if I'm hearing it, is what I would say is the result of the first half, right? It's kind of the way that people talk about, third world countries right now. And there's these, not third world, developing countries. So you have these countries that are these developing countries, and they want to, ultimately get to the point of where, say, the United States is in the ways that it does things. The issue that they're having is that they can't do the same things that the United States did to become a developing country, because it's considered to be illegal or some sort of faux pas. Like you're not allowed to go if you're, let's say, I'm trying to think of a developing country that's engaged with that, like just Uganda, if you will. If Uganda wants to be everything that America is, they're not allowed to go over to the United States and steal, 4 million people and make them work for them as their slaves for 240 something years. They're not allowed to do that anymore. You know what I mean? They weren't really allowed to by God's standard, although they would say they were before, but that's how America became the country that we did. It was on the backs of labor and again, Uganda, they're not allowed to just, kill everybody in their space without the world doing anything about it as a genocide to make, to the country next to them. They're not allowed to do that. So all that to say, America, talking about putting the, computers in your hands and going to the moon, all that's really inspiring. But again, it's said without the recognition of what was done to create the opportunity for us to even think about that kind of engagement and the stories that weren't even told about how we participated in that as well. That's why I love like the movie, like Hidden Figures, thinking through the mathematicians and the women that were a part of some of that work. So I don't know. So that's part of where I think we are right now as we move forward. And I think
real quick, if I can throw just again, I just want to make sure that those who missed because I know a good number of our audience may have missed the
may not have actually listened.
Yeah, so the part that's right before that again continues to let you know we're not stretching Mr. Trump here. He says the United States will once again consider itself a growing nation. Again, expansion. One that increases our wealth, expands our territory, builds our cities, raises our expectations, and carries our flag into new and beautiful horizons. We will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars. And the reason that sounds like, well, he's talking about Mars, but what it is, it almost establishes manifest destiny as still
in play.
What we're doing now, we're just going to now continue that into space. So it's a subtle admission that we are in a manifest destiny paradigm currently, and we're just going to keep expanding forward. It says it speaks to maybe what some people believe America is doing now, without necessarily saying that. And so anyway, so that's the spirit of imperialism. That's the spirit of expansion and colonization. Those are all the parts of American history that we don't like. Those are the parts that we are supposed to be regretting.
Yeah.
And it sounds like his speech is going to lean into them.
Yeah, and you talk about empire creation, and I think when I hear that, it makes me think of where some of the conversation I know we have a lot is where the church kind of engages with some of this stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not necessarily about the. Obviously, there's things to be said about how the church engaged with this idea of expansion historically in our country for sure. But as we go forward a bit, because there's other things that's happened this week that I want us to talk to a little bit too, and so this idea of this Christendom is Christendom over Christianity, right? This Christendom is kind of supporting this idea of expansion, right? They will ascribe to this idea of manifest destiny. They may not use that terminology, but they will say things in the nature of, yes, I think America has a key role to play in God's plan for the world and to this point for the universe, right? Which again doesn't sound all that bad until you drop it into the historical construct of how that language has been used previously, right? So we just have to keep that in mind.
And I can rock with that a little bit. Like I can rock with America or Christians in America.
Well, that's the difference.
Right?
Yeah. Well, but again, you had
Christians in America. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like America. That's where it is. It's like America, not Christians. And again, it's kind of hearkening back to where the ways in which people thought about mission work in America, early 20th century, where it was from the West to the rest, right? And they didn't acknowledge these sort of outposts, if you will, that were are developing around the world. And now we have all these sort of, if I can call it, foundational center points of Christianity that are scattered throughout the world. And so they're not just people who are Christians aren't just leaving from America to engage the world with the gospel, if you will, but they're leaving from Central Africa. They're leaving from China. They're leaving from Central South America. Like, so there's these other places where that's going. So this idea of America having a special place is again another conversation that where Christianity has been woven so closely with America that when you say America, people who are Christian will say America, meaning Christianity has some work to do throughout the world, without acknowledging that Christianity is functioning and actually growing more around the world than in America. In fact, most of Christians live south and east of where America is, right? That's 82 to 85% of Christians live in the southern and in what would be eastern, I guess, hemispheres, as opposed to the northern part. So anyway, that's just something to recognize. Is this Christendom thought process, and the ways in which that mindset, that Christian imperialist, white supremacist Christendom practice has played out in the history of America. And usually what that means is people who aren't a part of that, people who aren't a part of the majority and part of the elite, usually get jettisoned to the side. They become lower on the caste system, which makes it easier for them to be oppressed and tragedies to be kind of inflicted upon them. And so we know this as the church, that there were points in time throughout our history where when you had the pulpit, when the church had the pulpit, that they said nothing. They said nothing to the leaders who were doing this. They said nothing about what God actually wants. They did not actually ascribe to a true understanding of what is biblical righteousness, but rather they went to American righteousness, which are completely different plumb lines for us to work off of what a just society might look like. And therefore, we saw things like slavery and genocide and concentration camps with the Japanese, boarding schools with our Native Americans. We saw those things. And so now what it would seem like is, okay, when we start to see this church, that we should probably say something about it. Like, we have another opportunity if we see people trying to harken back to the history of things, that when we see it now, we can go, oh my gosh, God's given us another chance to try to make it better and to do something different this time, so it doesn't lead to those on the margins getting oppressed and treated the way that they had been historically. And here we are in the midst of what is another movement that is affecting a marginalized group, our immigrants and refugee communities, particularly our Black and brown versions of those. We have a lot of things that already been threatened and already been put into play, even with some executive orders, about how those immigrants, particularly the undocumented ones, are going to be pursued. We've even had some chest pounding around how the sons and daughters of immigrants who were not born here, those who are naturalized citizens, might be engaged, but they haven't done that yet. But we need to know that that's out there. So we have this, and here we come to the national sort of prayer. What is it? Breakfast. and the president, his wife, vice president, wife, sitting in the front row at the Washington National Cathedral. Beautiful cathedral, has lots of history. I know Dr. King gave one of his last speeches in this place, and this bishop, the Episcopal bishop, Marianne. I keep wanting to call her a buddy. I don't think that's right. I haven't actually heard her name said yet. I've just been watching her name. She stands up and she gives this homily, about 14-minute homily. And in the midst of it, she talks about the ideals. She warns us of the position that we currently are in terms of unity as a country, the way that we talk to one another, the way that we engage with one another online. And she talks about some of the ideas of what unity actually is, the tools that are needed for unity. Talks about seeing people being made in the image of God and having equal value. She talks about the idea of being honesty in the midst of conversation, in the midst of our work. Talks about humility, and then turns her attention to the president himself, who's sitting on the front row, and pleads with the president to have mercy on not only she kind of starts off with the children of LGBTQIA plus and transgender children, who are, as she said, a part of, both all the parties, independent, Republican, Democrats, to have mercy because they are fearing for their lives. And then she moves to this immigrant population, in which obviously are very scared and just pleading for mercy in the midst of it. And when you watch it, for me, Antwuan, I don't know your thoughts on it, but when I watched that homily, I was really like, you follow me on social media, like I was like, it was like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
Because it was so beautifully articulated. This amazing woman, which already goes against so many of evangelical thought processes, that you'd even have this woman not only leading a church, but the bishop of a diocese there, just standing strong in the pulpit, reading from her notes, no quiver in the voice, bringing the speech, knowing that she was going to call up something in the president, in her moment, the moment that she had to speak, that she was going to do this, and the internet blew up on it.
Yeah. The internet, and it's amazing. I was talking about this with some people this week, and it's amazing that a Christian message would trigger a Christian the way it does, because the message that she gave it sounds more like Jesus. It sounds like Jesus is mercy, kindness, compassion, unconditional love is what compassion really is making an allusion to when it talks in the scriptures.
Yeah.
Compassion is typically it's a inch toward unconditional love, which is also connected to mercy, like the sort of agape love that God calls us to. The natural fruits of that kind of love is mercy. It means that you get something you didn't qualify for. Is compassion. It is, I don't have all the reasons to have passion, have love and care for you, but I do. You don't earn it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very Christian request. And even if you don't like that she said it, I think it would have been simple enough to be like, you know what, I disagree with her, and that could have been fine. We would all disagree with you for disagreeing with her, but that's okay for you to say that. But it was the language that came out of that, certainly from a lot of the right-wing voices that I saw, was that she was a lunatic and she was crazy and she was being a heretic and she needs to apologize. And it's the product of all those triggers. She triggered them.
Yeah.
And she triggered them while almost whispering.
Yeah.
Like you had to lean in to hear it.
Yeah.
Like, is she talking? She wasn't yelling. It wasn't emotional in the sense that she was speaking from a triggered state. Like you said, it was consistent. And if anyone's going to call me out, then I need them to call me out the way she did, because it wasn't attacking. It was clear though. And it was pointed. Everyone got the message, and he didn't like it, and neither did those around him. It's one thing when we talk about politics and religion and how politics, you could disagree. The heartbreaking thing for me is you could disagree with politics and the church can respond to bad politics. It's another thing when the church is executing the bad politics, you know. And then how does the church respond to the church, or at least those who are carrying the church, you know, explaining themselves as a church? They're the ones actually executing. This goes back to what we're saying. If 80% of white evangelical Christians are saying we want Trump, and then this lady calls them to a very Christ-centered ideal, and they're triggered by it, then it says something about white evangelical church and their connectedness to Christ's message. And it hurts our witness more than helps it, which of course I'm always talking about. I'm most concerned with how we're going to represent Christ in our social world. And yeah, so what she showed me was, okay, she said it in the most receivable way. Okay. I cannot imagine myself giving a charge to the president in a softer way while being true to what I'm actually talking about, right? Like, and so if that's going to trigger her, then it trigger him and maybe other believers, then we may be at a point where the church has to decide that it's just going to cost us to make a stand for what Christ believes in this current political climate. And I think what I've done, and I've been working on all the year, and I still will work this a little bit. I'm not going to just like throw words out and not care how they land, but I have to realize that there's no way to say certain things now without triggering really, I'm going to say it, this alt conservative right, this far right that we're now living into while holding on to Christian principles. It seems to me that Christ is going to offend the far right. And if I represent and speak Christ, it doesn't matter what words I use. It doesn't matter my tone. What he's doing and what he wants and what they're doing, what they want, seem to be very, very different. Mm-hmm. And not in every way. There's some things that I would agree with there, but in these ways about how we're going to treat people, how we're going to handle our politic and our governance, what the church's role will be in the midst of that politic. I think Christ is, if we're following the words of Jesus, we're going to find ourselves at odds with both red and blue. And I think it's time for pastors and churches to begin working from that mindset instead of believing that maybe they can find a way to split the middle.
Yeah. Against red and blue. Yeah. It's going to be outrageous right now. Cause, and I would argue that I would argue that it's not even just the far right. Like when I see people responding on it, I do see what, if we go back to our Christianity Public Square, use Dr. Bach's sort of spectrum there. I do see a lot of ones, kind of the white nationalists, maybe even the white supremacists and whatnot that are completely out on what's happening. But I think, the twos and even some of the 2.5s to 3s are responding and utilizing that. I mean, if we think about the ways that they responded to this bishop, one of the pushbacks I kept hearing was, why did he call her out? Or excuse me, why did she call him out? Which, first of all, she pleaded with him. She implored him for mercy, right?
Yeah.
There was a point in which
a tyrant. She said, "Would you be merciful?"
Yeah. Now there was a point in which she did say, not directly to him, but about him, I would say, where she talked about ideas, dealing with people with contempt and mockery and things of that nature is not a way to do life. It's not a way to lead a country, right? So I think that that's a place that she probably called him out a bit. But when we get to the part that really most people saw, because most people didn't watch it, they just watched what they saw on their news, right?
Right.
And it was just about the president have mercy, right? They saw that she just took this moment, and it sounded as if it was this moment that was just about her, right? But the first thing is they said it should have been private, right? And they kind of utilized this Matthew 18:15 where you're talking about if you or your brother have a sin against one another, that you should deal with them privately before taking it public. I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, is that like?
I disagree with that. I think in
Okay.
this context, I disagree that 100%. Jesus didn't do that privately.
Mm.
When he dealt with we have Matthew 23 because he did it publicly, and the reason he did it publicly is because they were public figures, and what he was speaking to was not the product of one person, but an entire way of thinking about things that affected all these people. Like that passage is about me offending Marcus about something Marcus has done to me. That is not the same as going to a king or a president who's enacted something over an entire country and saying, hey, I don't normally have access to you. There's no way I could talk to you in a one-on-one scenario. So when I have an opportunity, I'm going to speak up and out, and I'm going to speak to you directly. I disagree with that 100%. I think that has no legs. And again, I think that that what that's doing is trying to save the face of Donald Trump.
Sure.
and that side, and still living into that trauma of, like I said before, the white persons don't want to be the bad guy, and you see these traumatic responses, these unreasonable. If you've been following us, I've told you before, whenever otherwise rational and people behave irrationally, it's usually the product of fear or trauma,
or the devil.
or the devil. And in this particular scenario, all of us would say that their response to this woman is an irrational response. It's okay for them to disagree, but the stretch that they're doing feels irrational. That means you hit either a fear button or a trauma button, typically. And I think that trauma is, we don't want to be the bad guy, and you made us feel bad for doing what we're doing.
Sure.
And so now we're going to attack you because we want to make you the bad guy.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. So don't tell us in public because we want to protect our image. We don't want to be the bad guy in front of people. Tell us in private. I think that's what that's about. And I think that's weak sauce, to put it. I just think that's weak. I think that's weak sauce. I don't want to juvenile. I mean, I think it's weak for someone who pretends to be strong to say, hey, I don't want to be confronted. No, be confronted. Retort. Give a retort. Say, hey, we believe this is the right thing to do because, right? And give a qualified response that some of us who are willing to think critically about things, who are willing to spend time thinking and speaking to people who disagree with us, give us something to work with. I'll let you get to your next thing. I was saying just recently in a conversation we hold here in Color Commentary and in Threaded, we've had conversations for the last 10 years where we speak regularly to people who don't agree with us, and we have tools to help us do that. And one of the things I like to keep in my back pocket is, hey, I can understand where you're coming from. It's one of my favorite lines. I want to say it with integrity. So when I'm sitting and talking to somebody and I disagree with them, I'm hoping to get enough about their mindset and their rationale that I can say, you know what, that makes sense that you would arrive there. I disagree with it, but I want to give, I'll give you the credit that that's rational and it makes sense. But these days, you don't even have that. Sometimes you don't even get an opportunity to hear the rationale behind something. It's just because you decided if you disagree, then it's just back to name calling. It's not critical thinking. It's not an exchange of ideas, right? So it's not just disagreement that we have. We just need to be able to exchange. So Trump, if you don't like what this lady said, you don't have to make her out to be a heretic and all this other stuff. Just say, hey, I don't agree with what she said. We're going to do this because we believe this is right for X, Y, and Z, and give a rational response. Otherwise, it just sounds like petty, childlike ranting.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I've not been a big fan of that. And I like how you're talking about it. And I think I see it, Christians only trying to save face because they, particularly those who have connected themselves to this administration via their vote, right? They don't want to be a party to what would be considered an unmerciful king, right? And so instead of dealing with the concept of someone who is unmerciful, in dealing with that, they deal with how the person who called out that lack of mercy called it out.
Right.
And I think that makes sense. I mean, but we have, and there's two things I'll say with that. First is you got you're using Matthew, as the Matthew passage as your passage to kind of work this out, but it's just like so much other contextualization where you just kind of you can pull a verse out and start working on it, as opposed to really looking at the meta narrative of the Bible and seeing, like, how does this work as powers seek to engage in oppressive behavior? How have people of God actually dealt with them? Now, you would say, like, if I mentioned like Esther, right, like who went into the king's space, right? It's very similar, right? It's not just her and the king. The king had a court. Like, it was a lot of people. That's part of why the king didn't want nobody just walking in there. You know what I mean? Like, that was a big deal. So calling out the king to say, hey, you're about to kill my people. I don't want you to do that. Here's what's happening. That's Esther. She's saying, this is such a time as this. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to use my access to the king. Moses is the same way, right? He had access to the king, access to the Pharaoh, and the Egyptians all knew what he was calling them out on, because every time he didn't do what he's supposed to do, some sort of plague came in, right? And Moses is still calling it out. Why? Because he's committing an atrocity against God by treating people not as image bearers of God. It's a public thing. Jesus himself, when he went into the temple and he started flipping tables, he didn't ask each one of the people, like, hey, I need to talk to you about how you're cheating the poor out of stuff, and if we can talk about that. No, he just flipping tables and breaking stuff. I think there's a meta narrative that tells us that and this is where I think we are, and it goes to the point you were making, is we're in a different time now, right? Imagine. Let me say it like this. I've had people go, hey, this is not how pastors should talk to people. They shouldn't single people out in their congregation. That's another piece that's coming on. The context is bad. That's not how you should do things. We have rules in such a way that we don't call out single people in the congregation. That's not important. Okay. So let me just ask you if this thing works. Let's just say you were in Nazi Germany, and you saw and Hitler came to your church, right? And he was creating concentration camps that were, killing millions of Jews, and he came to your church. And he sat and listened to a message that you were going to give. Are you telling me that the way to handle that is to not say anything to him, but to just be like, well, let me give you a little homily and something from 1 John 12? No, like, when are you going to get a chance to speak to the power to tell them how unjust what they're doing is? Imagine if the churches historically in this America that we want to go back to, imagine if they had used their platforms and their pulpits to actually say what is just from the Bible to the people in power who are in charge of administering the justice. What if they had done that? Oh, wait, this is exactly what the black churches did during the civil rights movement. Right. They used the pulpit to speak into this idea, and it led to a movement that ultimately finally created a society in which all that you and I could be born into the first generation of people with all our rights and privileges. I bet you if you went to every single one of those churches, they would not have some sort of hard and fast rule about calling people out in church. I tell you what, if LBJ dropped into Martin Luther King's church, he would have said, hey, we got the presidents here. Mr. President, what are you going to do about XYZ? I absolutely would have done that. Yeah. And the churches that wouldn't are the ones who were not affected by the oppression and the injustice, and the ones who were not with him in the civil rights movement. So the question becomes, what she is doing, what this bishop did, is exactly what those who have made prominent differences in the lives of other people, what they have done to stand in the gap for them, people in the Bible, people in our history. She is playing that part. And the other part is the one who was the one administering the injustice or oppressing the people. Who, I said it before, who are you high-fiving right now in history? Yeah. Who are you lining up with? You really want to be lining up against somebody who sees, and this is another piece. She's not in the Matthew chapter is you and me have an issue. We're coming in engaging if we have sin. She's not stepping to Donald Trump because she and he have a personal beef. Right. She's standing in the gap for people who would never be able to be in relationship or in the room with Donald Trump. She's standing up for them. She is putting herself in harm's way, because we all know in this political environment, if you say anything about Donald Trump, and we saw it all week, everybody lining up to kiss Donald Trump's feet, you know what I mean? And they're there to, kiss my Converse, you know what I mean? Like, he's loving all that stuff. And finally, we have somebody who says in their moment, when they're actually able to stand in front of the leader, that they say, I'm going to tell you what I think God is asking you to do, is to show mercy. Who are you wanting to be on the side of this? And that's that is a very, and again, stepping in the gap for others, not for herself, for others.
Yeah.
And she knew she was going to get lambasted. She knew she was going to get sacrificed, crucified the next day by Donald Trump on his Twitter, and true to form, he did it. And yet she still said, you know what? Even though I know all this is going to happen to me, out of love, I'm going to come and sacrifice for these people who don't have a voice. Now, who does that sound like?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the pick up your cross and follow me-ness of the moment that the church currently has. And our church is focusing a lot on discipleship. I talk a lot about discipleship, and we got to start talking about the cost. We talk about what discipleship is, but there's a cost associated with discipleship. And in Matthew 16, one of the things we haven't done is talk about, like, what does Jesus say about discipleship? And one of the things he says about discipleship is that there is a cost, that you're going to pick up a cross and follow me. And some of that is kind of personal implications and social implications, and believe that God has the church together in America right now. God's people are in America right now for this purpose, to do something in this moment that we need to be a part of. And what's becoming increasingly clear to me is that it's going to be a little cross bearing. And I think we are hesitant to see it as a cross bearing. We want to do the discipleship and have the influence without the cost. Understandably, nobody wants to have, if I can do it without the cost, without it cost me anything,
that'd be great.
That way every time, right? So of course we're looking for that, and we could be excused for that being our default behavior. But when the moment arises and it's revealed to us that it will be a cost, that there will be a cross to bear, to properly represent Christ in a non-Christian land that's
it. Mm-hmm.
To be Christian.
Come on.
That is a very unique challenge that we have in this moment. And it's challenging because all the language that we would use is being disqualified and or used against us as not Christ-centered, but politics-centered, and muddies our ability to actually speak the word and preach the word.
What language are you talking about? Like,
word.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, we're talking about, like, if we say the words justice in a church.
Yeah.
If you say the words justice, if you say the words reconciliation, unity, we had
mercy.
Mercy. You say you had compassion. When you say these words, people start to say, "Oh, we're in a quote unquote woke church," right?
Yeah,
a lot of people do this.
Yeah. That's moved. You said it really well earlier today when we were talking. It's moved. When we were in 2020 and 2021, it was CRT, right?
Yeah.
And that stuff was underneath that. But now the new terminology, the umbrella language that's being used now is DEI. So if you hear DEI, these words, unity, reconciliation, race, right? Justice, like you
These
can't.
DEI words now.
Yeah.
So DEI is the new CRT. So now we have a new umbrella under which we're going to put anything to do with these concepts and label them as far extreme radical left, so that if a church stands up and says, you know what, we have Spanish speaking people in our community, our current administration, we want to be able to issue some edicts that's going to affect their lives dramatically. We want to think about how we can love those people well. That sounds political.
Yeah.
Instead of like Christ. And a pastor no longer has the freedom to stand up in front of his own body and say that without fear that somebody's in the room are going to see it as a political statement and not as the product of what the kingdom on earth as in heaven is. And the fact that we're in that world, we're in that space right now. We have to sit down and think through and massage what words we use. We can't just say love now. We can't just say justice. We can't just say mercy. We can't just say racial reconciliation or cross-cultural engagement. All these words have to have these qualifiers. Oh, well, we don't mean this and we don't mean that. It really is handcuffing the church. Meanwhile, the other side can say whatever
they want,
whatever it wants to do, and it continues to have a blank check of language,
right? Make up language,
and a benefit of doubt that, well, they didn't really mean that. They probably really meant this. Everyone gets the benefit of doubt on this side of the coin. But the believers who stand up and say, we believe God has called us to love all image bearers and to extend mercy and grace and compassion and be a community who's marked by that. Therefore, we're going to go against the grain sometimes because we're not political. That group has little benefit of the doubt. That group has to really watch its language. It has to be really selective about how often it talks about.
Yeah.
That's not the environment. That's the challenge. I think that's the challenge of the American church right now. And we're in Texas. It's even worse, I think, for us in Texas.
Yeah.
And if we happen to go to a multi-ethnic church, then it even further complicates. So the work is just going to get a little more difficult. But I do believe we're here to do it.
Well, and I think you're hitting it right in the middle of there, and being able to utilize the language, taking away your language is a powerful deal. And it's not, again, we do a lot of work inside the church. And so there are ways in which we get into the point where we're not, and you said earlier, like, I'm just not interested in trying to kind of play into what would be the vernacular relativism of our society, right? Where I say it and I can mean it your way, my way, and that kind of stuff, and we just kind of keep moving along with that. I think, and this is in the American righteousness system, if you will. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely appropriate. Like, sure, it's America. Like, you can keep redefining words and making them mean what you want to. Like, that's fine. That's the way an empire, a country it has the right to kind of create its own system of how it can do that. It's why we kind of work so much in the church, because we go, look, if we're all going to say that we're in the church, then there's language that we all actually ascribe to from a biblical standpoint that creates an opportunity for us to find unity, right? The term justice should not create divide in the church, but rather the Bible helps us to create unity. Right. But what happens when you start to use the biblical version of justice, because people are more connected to Christendom than Christianity, then now it creates a divide. And they want you to rename it to make them feel more comfortable with the word, because they find in some ways some connection to that word that makes them feel like a villain. And that's a problem, because the Bible should read us all, right? That's the issue. Like, yes, the reason if you feel like a villain when you hear the word justice mentioned in the American construct, let the Bible be the thing that's making you feel like that. I'm not making you feel like that. I'm just using the term, I'm putting it in biblical terms. And if you find yourself going against that, then go through what we always were supposed to do in Christianity. Let me lament that I was a part of that. Let me confess that, receive the forgiveness, and then repent and turn the opposite way and move to restoration. Yeah. Right? That's how justice, that's how it works in the Bible. The American construct doesn't do it. And as you said many times, and we talk about, right, like, we keep, as the church, functioning. There are some of us who are functioning from a biblical righteousness, and some who are functioning from an American righteousness. And the terms and the approach to, let's call it justice, isn't the same in both of those. And the thing is if you adhere to the American version, it's going to be much more comfortable for you, particularly if you're white. But if you adhere to the biblical one, it's going to challenge all of us. Yeah. And it's going to put you at odds with the empire and the Christendom folks. And I think that's where those of us who are going, you know what, I know this is going to cost me, but I'm going to stick with this biblical version of justice. So when you hear me say justice, I'm not playing this game. right? Particularly in the church. Like, I'm not playing this game. Let's go to the Bible. Let's work it out. Let's walk through Amos.
Like in a community where you're regular, part of the
Yeah.
reason that this is a problem is because we say it so irregularly.
That's
like
fair.
If it were regular, like in my house, when I say something, if I say it enough, my kids, they know what I mean when I say it, because I'm always saying it, and I'm always saying it in a way that I mean it. And it would show up, and there wouldn't be room for a lot of misunderstanding of what I mean, because I say it so often,
right,
that you can't be confused. Someone else who isn't in my house enough may show up and may be like, oh, he said that. I wonder what he means. And the house, my kids will say, oh, no, he don't mean that. He actually means this. Part of the issue is we have become so afraid to say what we mean enough, so that it becomes regular and normal, in our context.
To not say it.
We leave room for this confusion. For this, we have to qualify it every time we say it, because we don't say it quite often enough. Yeah. Right? It's the same kind of mission leaks, vision leaks kind of conversation of any leadership moment. If the language is said all the time and the message connected to that language is said all the time, then it becomes abnormal to misread it. Right? It suddenly like, hey, I think he's political. Like, no, clearly he said this for the last 20 times in the last 30 weeks, that you can't have misread it. He said it this way over and over.
Yeah, consistency.
So we've got to figure out how to rob this. It's all that is fear, Marcus. All we're talking about is fear, the fear of loss, the fear of losing members, the fear of losing position, losing
power,
of losing reputation. People like me, and now they may not like me as much.
Sure.
Those fears are creating us. They're dictating how we respond in love or not, because we're worried. And I say we've got to figure out, we, the church at large, have got to figure out how to clarify consistently our message of love and unity and justice. And this is the challenge, and I don't know if we're going to be able to do it, but we've got to do it now with a voice that's standing on the other side wearing the same t-shirt we're wearing, saying and doing the opposite thing. And that's just going to be the challenge that we're in. And if we don't face that, if we don't understand that that's the fight we're in, and start to prepare ourselves for that fight. Those Rocky movies are always funny, because Rocky's training is different in every movie, right? Because the enemy is just a little bit different. Sure. One, he's got to be faster. The other one, he's got to be able to take a hit. All the different things, right? He's got to understand the battle that he's in order to train well for it. We are going to have to understand this is the enemy. This is not the enemy. This is the battle that we're in. This is what we're going to have to contend with. If we don't do that, we're going to be ineffective, and we're going to sound out of touch, and as that, out of vogue. It won't resonate. And I'm not interested in anything like that.
Well, and look, you kind of said it quickly, and we'll kind of wrap it up with these kind of thoughts here. If not my thoughts, but just this section here. I think it is important, and I'll say it multiple times, is that this battle does have an enemy. The issue is we want to make the enemy the person on the other side. Mm-hmm. And I would say that when you start to look and you see inside of quote unquote Christianity, right, a divide that's happening around biblical terms, when a pastor can get up on a pulpit and plead with a world power to show mercy on those who might experience oppression, and oppression, and the Christian community is divided on it, that is a power and principalities fog. That is the work of the enemy, because again, the prayer that Jesus left us with is, man, God, I pray that those who come after me, that they would be one, just as you and I, God, are one. So if that's Jesus's top prayer right before he goes to the cross, you can imagine. And he said that if they do that, then people will know, God, that who you are, that I'm your son, and that you sent me. That is what the enemy does not want. So the division inside of the church should show us that there is an enemy at play. And so we need to attack that enemy, not the people, but the enemy inside. It's what Dr. King said several times. He's like, the enemy is not those who commit injustice. It's injustice itself, which is the work of the enemy. The enemy utilizing people to create and perpetuate injustice. And so it's the same thing. So what that does to me is I look at the people in the midst of the conversation I'm in and recognize that they too are a product of an oppressive system that is a spiritually oppressive system. And so my prayers become different for them, but I still am not going to let them get away with what the enemy is asking them to do. And so there is a fight. I just want us to see that the battle is not yours, it's the Lord's, right? Like the battle is God's, and the enemy is the enemy that's always been. And this thing that we're going through is the thing that always happens within the church, is that they find a way to be disunified. And many times they get disunified or ununified, divided. There's the word. Get divided around ways in which you deal with the marginalized and oppressed, which is so hilarious, right? Because the incarnation of Christ was literally intentionally made in such a way that he could identify with the marginalized so that we would never disconnect from the marginalized, but always run to the marginalized to find him. Yeah. And so now we have this divide on how people can even talk about and approach the leadership who's dealing with the marginalized. It's fascinating. So we know. So all that to say is, so we're going forward. We're moving into a new time here, Antwuan. Another season. We don't know what this season's timing is, how long it will last, but it is a season. And I know that I've seen since the inauguration, particularly from those who are in the racial justice space, I've seen a lot of kind of, lamenting and mourning and things of that nature and grieving, which I think is very appropriate. I think there was a lot of opportunity. And particularly now that we hear the speeches and we see what's going on, I think we can look back and go, oh, that grief was actually warranted. But now is not but now it's time to move on. Not move on like don't grieve, but it's time to get your donkey in shape, right? Like get off your donkey and get moving. The work is ahead. There are people's lives on the line. There are families on the line. We need to get to work. And it will not stop. But you can take breaks. You can take rests. We need communities that we surround ourselves with that will pour into us, that will continue to encourage us. And you know what else can encourage you? Is actually diving in and spending time in the Word to see all the ways in which the Bible speaks to the work that we're doing. It is chocked full. I never forget the issue I had with an elder once where we were talking about God loving the poor the most, right? And he showed me 2 verses in the Bible in which God talks about you can't show favoritism to the poor, but didn't even begin to open the meta narrative of the Bible around injustice, the marginalized, the widows, the orphans, the immigrants, the refugees. Never once dealt with how many umpteen thousands of verses on that. We've got lots to support us on this. And we've got a God that has shown us in Revelation 7:9 that he is moving in his arc, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, is moving towards justice. It's also moving towards this beautiful kingdom that has all tribes, tongues, and nations. And this people, as they come together worshiping God, they're not only a diverse crew, but they are also reconciled. They live in a society that is just. They've gotten through all of their beef and found a way to unify and understand that they are the children of a God that they all serve and the Lamb. And so we can move forward on that.
100%. I think for those listening, if you're looking for a Bible study this year that you want to go through, I would like to recommend 1 Peter. You hear me talk about it all the time. I have a whole list, but 1 Peter, God is writing to a group of people who are politically marginalized, believers, and that whole letter is about that encouragement. And I think there's a lot of encouragement for this moment in the church out of that letter. And I realized that there's a little section there that we always have to deal with where it says submission to government. But it's in the middle of all this other stuff that is very, very important. So anyway, I don't want to get into it all right now, but I believe that is one of the most relevant books for our moment. And I would encourage you to take a slow walk through that book.
Yeah. And in a time of biblical illiteracy, getting deeper into that word and breathing it in and let the Spirit of God read you as you go forward, it's going to be important, because we can go too far on this side too. We can easily get down the road and start looking like the enemy that we are battling as well. And so that's what I love about doing this work, Antwuan. I love doing it in the church, or should I say, I love doing it in the vicinity of the theological, missiological, and biblical frameworks of Christianity. I think there's it's not perfect, but the pieces are all there to support the work of loving our neighbor really well, with the understanding that when you take a stand to love your neighbor in God's righteous way, it's going to put you at odds with other definitions of righteousness in a righteous society. And we're going to see that, and we got to be ready for that. So I'm excited to move forward. I'm exhausted already. So I am going to be putting in, I'm remembering now from the first movie that I needed to be better about my established Sabbaths, times to look forward to, where I literally unplug. I don't get on Facebook or the socials. I don't watch the historical movies. I don't do the work that we're doing. I just unpack with whatever I need to unpack. And I think I recommend that for others too. You're going to need those seasons. I also keep a lot of folks around me where I can unpack these ideas and they can challenge me on that, right? You see it in art. Antwuan is one of those folks, and as part of the team I'm on, there's other little groups I'm a part of too that people can say, you ain't doing that right, Doc, right? Who love Jesus and who want to engage this and do it well. That's an important piece. Mental health, physical health is important. Getting my body ready, like it hits you in all places. So we have to make sure that we're taking care of our bodies as well. We've got a couple of podcasts that talk about this. If you look, I think about a year ago, we have one from Dorcas. I've forgotten how to Dorcas Chang, I believe, and she unpacks this great idea of social justice for the sensitive soul. And it creates the opportunity to see where you can participate in this work without having to be right at the front, fighting everything, protesting, marching all the time. Like you can play other roles, but take care of your friend. Take care of your friends. Take care of yourself is so important. We love you. We want you to be successful. We got a lot coming, saints, and we're going to need each other as we go. So I appreciate y'all listening. Antwuan, always a pleasure having you in here in color commentary. We'll keep coming back in. I think we're going to need this as we go in. We need it for ourselves too. So this has been Color Commentary, colorful conversations by colorful people about Christianity, culture, and race. And we're excited to have you. And remember, as you go out into this world, this new season that we're in, you can't take these shades off, these lenses, right? You have got to be able to see the perspectives of others through all the lenses that are out there. So in that way, we always encourage you to stay colored.